Mountain man, still a virgin at 40, until a fat widow asked to stay with him to escape her husband. The church bell tolls. Snow falls on a lonely cabin in the high country. A giant mountain man, 40 years old and untouched by love, spends his days in silence until a battered widow pounds on his door, begging for shelter. She's on the run from her lawman husband, and she carries a secret that could tear the whole town apart. Thunder of hooves. Jail keys rattle. The deputy hunts her like prey, and the mountain man must choose, keep hiding in the wilderness, or stand up for the only woman who ever saw his worth. But when truth and violence clash in the dusty street, the stakes explode higher than anyone dreamed. Will this quiet mountain man find the courage to fight for her dignity and claim a life he never believed he deserved? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The mountain wind howled fierce and cold against Lucas Boone's cabin walls. Inside, the big woodsman moved with careful steps around the small space, trying not to disturb the woman who'd collapsed into his single wooden chair. The lantern light caught the bruise darkening her cheek, and his chest tightened at the sight. Isabella Hollis sat with her head bowed, her sodden skirts dripping onto the plank floor. Her hands trembled as she gripped a tin cup of coffee he'd pressed into them moments before. The warmth seemed to slowly seep back into her, but her shoulders still shook with each crack of thunder. Lucas stood awkwardly by his stone hearth, unsure what to do or say. In all his 42 years, he'd never had a woman in his cabin. The space suddenly felt too small, too rough, too bachelor plain. He cleared his throat. Storm's fierce tonight. Isabella lifted her face. Despite the bruise and the exhaustion in her eyes, there was steel in her spine. I'm sorry to impose, Mr. Boone. I didn't know where else to go. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried weight. Lucas recognized the tone. It was the same one he'd heard in Wounded Creatures, determined to live despite their pain. He'd helped many such creatures over the years, though none had been human until now. No imposition, he managed, though the words felt clumsy in his mouth. You're welcome to stay. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Your husband? Deputy Hollis. She spoke the name like it was bitter medicine. He wasn't always. Her voice trailed off as another lightning flash lit the cabin. Lucas nodded, not needing to hear more. He'd seen Deputy Hollis in town, had noticed how the man's charm could turn to cruelty after a few drinks. The bruise on Isabella's face told its own story. The coffee pot bubbled on the hearth, and Lucas busied himself with stirring the beans he'd been preparing before the pounding on his door had startled him. The familiar tasks helped steady his nerves. Got some supper here if you're hungry. Thank you. Isabella's voice was steadier now. I haven't eaten since morning. Lucas served up 2 bowls of beans, adding an extra portion to hers. He'd learned to cook decent trail food over the years, though it wasn't fancy fare. To his relief, Isabella ate with good appetite, some color returning to her pale cheeks. The storm continued its assault on the cabin, rain drumming on the roof and wind rattling the shutters. Lucas found himself watching Isabella's face in the lamplight, noting how she flinched at each thunderclap. Yet there was something else in her expression, too. Relief, perhaps. The look of someone who'd found shelter after a long trial. You'll take the bed, he said suddenly, the words coming out gruffer than he'd intended. I'll sleep in the barn. Isabella looked up sharply. I couldn't put you out of your own bed, Mr. Boone. Lucas, he corrected softly, and it's no trouble. Got a good hayloft out there, dry enough. He didn't add that he'd spent plenty of nights in that loft already, on evenings when the walls of his cabin felt too close and the stars called to him. She studied him for a long moment, and Lucas fought the urge to look away. He wasn't used to being looked at so directly, especially by a woman. Most folks in town avoided his gaze, put off by his sighs and his awkward silences. But Isabella's eyes held no judgment, only a weighing sort of consideration. "Thank you, Lucas," she said finally. The sound of his name on her lips made something flutter in his chest, unfamiliar and alarming. He busied himself gathering what he'd need for the night, an extra blanket, his old Bible that had belonged to his mother. The familiar leather binding was worn smooth with age and use. He hesitated, then left it on the table near Isabella. "If you need anything," he started, then faltered, not sure how to finish the thought. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "I'm safer here than I've been in weeks." The simple truth in her words hit him hard. Here he was, a stranger to her really, yet she trusted him more than the man she'd married. The responsibility of that trust sat heavy on his shoulders. Lucas gathered his courage and spoke again. "No one will harm you here." "You have my word on that." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I believe you." He nodded once, awkward again, and headed for the door. The rain had settled into a steady drumming. The worst of the storm passed. In the barn, Lucas made himself comfortable in the hayloft, listening to the familiar sounds of his horses below. Sleep seemed impossible with his mind full of the woman in his cabin, but eventually the rhythm of the rain lulled him into a restless doze. Through the barn's slats, he could see the warm glow of his cabin's window. For the first time in years, that light meant more than just shelter. It meant someone was waiting within. The thought stirred something deep in his chest, like ground that's been frozen too long finally starting to thaw. Lucas stared at the cabin roof, his heart pounding with the realization that everything in his carefully ordered life had just shifted. He'd lived alone for so long, content with his solitude, or so he'd thought. Now, with Isabella's presence filling his cabin with something more than just lamplight, he wasn't sure of anything anymore. The night wrapped around him like a familiar blanket, but sleep remained elusive. His thoughts kept returning to Isabella, to the courage it must have taken to flee into the storm, to trust a stranger rather than endure more abuse. He'd always figured his isolation was a choice, but lying there in the darkness, he had to admit it had been more like surrender, a giving up on the possibility of human connection. A coyote called in the distance, its lonely cry echoing off the ridge. But tonight, for the first time in years, Lucas's cabin wasn't empty. That simple fact changed everything, though he couldn't yet see where this new path might lead. As another round of thunder rolled over the mountains, he closed his eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring challenges he'd never faced before. But for now, he'd done what needed doing, offered shelter to someone in need, just as his mother had taught him all those years ago. Dawn crept over the ridge, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Lucas finished spreading fresh hay for his old mule, Betsy, who nickered softly at his familiar presence. The barn's weathered walls creaked in the morning breeze, still damp from last night's storm. His boots squelched in the mud as he made his way back to the cabin. Through the window, he caught sight of Isabella asleep under his mother's patchwork quilt. Her dark hair spread across his pillow. The sight made his throat tight. It had been so long since anyone but him had slept in that bed. The door hinges protested as he eased inside, trying not to wake her. But Isabella's eyes fluttered open, wariness giving way to recognition. She sat up quickly, smoothing her rumpled skirts. "Good morning, Mr. Lucas," she corrected herself, a flush coloring her cheeks. "I hope I haven't overslept." "Sun's barely up," he assured her, moving to stoke the banked fire. "Thought we might have some breakfast?" He busied himself with morning tasks, brewing coffee, mixing biscuit dough, slicing salt pork. The familiar routine helped calm his nerves, though he was acutely aware of Isabella's presence as she folded the quilt and straightened the bed. "You're very kind," she said softly, watching him work. "I don't know how to thank you properly for taking me in last night." Lucas shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Isabella's voice was firm. Most wouldn't. Especially not knowing who I was running from. He turned from the stove, sensing the weight in her words. Isabella stood by the table, her fingers tracing the worn spine of his mother's Bible. My husband, she continued, each word careful and measured, is Deputy Clay Hollis. Lucas's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Everyone knew Deputy Hollis, his quick smile and quicker temper, the way he threw his weight around town. The bruise on Isabella's face took on new meaning. I see, he said finally, setting 2 tin plates on the table. Reckon that complicates things. Isabella's laugh held no humor. That's one way to put it. She sat down, wrapping her hands around the steaming coffee cup he offered. He has a way of making things look right on the surface. But underneath, she shuddered. Lucas served up the biscuits and pork, his mind working. Having the deputy's wife in his cabin was dangerous for both of them. Once the storm clears proper, he said slowly, I should take you back to town. Get things sorted legal-like. Isabella's face went pale. No, she whispered. Please, I can't go back there. The law is whatever Clay says it is, she cut in. He's got the sheriff wrapped around his finger and half the town besides. Her hands trembled as she set down her cup. I tried going to the proper authorities before. It only made things worse. Lucas frowned at his plate, troubled. He knew frontier justice could be uncertain, but surely there were channels, proper ways to handle such matters. The sun climbed higher as they finished breakfast in uneasy silence. Isabella insisted on helping with the dishes, and Lucas found himself studying her movements, the careful way she dried each plate, the gentle placement of cups back on their hooks. She moved like someone used to making herself small, unnoticed. Just past midday, the thunder of hooves broke the quiet. Lucas was at the window in 2 strides, his heart hammering. Through the glass, he saw riders appearing on the trail, 5 men, with Deputy Hollis in the lead. Isabella, he hissed, motioning her away from the window. It's them! She pressed against his arm, peering around him. At the sight of her husband, her fingers dug into Lucas's sleeve. If you send me back, she whispered, he'll kill me. Maybe not today, but soon. Please. The desperation in her voice cut through his hesitation. Lucas grabbed her hand, leading her to the ladder that accessed his storage loft. Up there, he urged. Stay quiet, no matter what happens. Isabella scrambled up, vanishing into the shadows just as boots hit his porch. Lucas straightened his shirt and opened the door before they could knock. Deputy Hollis stood front and center, his badge catching the noon sun. Despite his pleasant smile, his eyes were cold as river stones. Morning, Boone, he drawled. Quite a storm last night? Lucas nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Sure was. My wife went missing during it, Hollis continued. We're checking all the outlying places. You haven't seen anything unusual, have you? The other men shifted on their horses, watching. Lucas recognized most of them, townfolk who'd never given him more than a passing glance before. Now they studied him like he was a puzzle needing solving. Been here all night, Lucas said truthfully. Didn't see much through the rain. Hollis's eyes narrowed, scanning past Lucas into the cabin. Mind if we take a look around? Just to be thorough. Lucas filled the doorway with his considerable frame. Mind if I see a warrant first? A muscle twitched in Hollis's jaw. Now, Boone, no need to be difficult. I'm just a worried husband looking for his wife. And I'm just a private citizen who knows his rights. Lucas kept his voice steady, though his pulse raced. Come back with proper papers. I'll give you the full tour. The deputy's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly beneath, but he quickly smoothed his features, touching the brim of his hat. Fair enough. Sorry to trouble you." He turned his horse, but his parting glance held clear warning. "We'll be watching the trails. If you spot anything suspicious, you let me know right quick." Lucas stood in the doorway until the riders disappeared around the bend. Only then did he release the breath he'd been holding. "They're gone," he called softly. There was a rustling from above. Then Isabella descended the ladder. Her face was wet with tears, and before Lucas could step back, she pressed against his chest, sobbing quietly. "Thank you," she whispered between breaths. "Thank you for not sending me back." Lucas stood frozen, unsure what to do with his hands. Finally, he awkwardly patted her shoulder, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't name. Her tears soaked into his shirt, and he could feel her trembling against him. The afternoon light slanted through the windows as Isabella's sobs gradually quieted. She stepped back, wiping her eyes with her apron. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." "No need to apologize," Lucas cut in gruffly, still unsettled by the physical contact. He moved to the stove, needing something to do with his hands. "Should start supper soon." Isabella watched him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're letting me stay?" Lucas stirred the coals, considering his words carefully. "Hollis won't give up easy. He'll be watching the roads. Probably got men in town looking too." He straightened, meeting her gaze. "Ain't safe for you to go back, not now." "But it's dangerous for you too," she protested. "If they find me here." "Then we'll deal with that when it comes." Lucas surprised himself with the firmness in his voice. "For now, you need rest and safety." "I can provide that much, at least." Evening settled over the cabin like a soft blanket, bringing with it the familiar chorus of crickets and night birds. Lucas added wood to the fire, watching Isabella mend a tear in her skirt by lamplight. The simple domesticity of the scene stirred something in his chest, a longing he'd thought long buried. He knew harboring her was risky. Knew Hollis wouldn't stop searching, that the law might not be on their side. But watching Isabella's nimble fingers with the needle, seeing the peace that had settled over her features, Lucas couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. The cabin felt different now, warmer somehow. Not just shelter, but something more. Lucas wasn't sure what path lay ahead, but he knew with certainty that he couldn't send Isabella back to a man who would harm her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small window, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn table where Lucas and Isabella sat. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, broken only by the scrape of spoons against tin plates. Lucas kept his eyes fixed on his breakfast, uncomfortably aware of the feminine presence across from him. The cabin seemed smaller somehow, more confining with her there. She'd insisted on making breakfast, cornmeal mush with the last of his dried apples, and the simple meal tasted better than anything he'd managed on his own. Isabella rose, gathering their empty plates. "Let me tend to these," she said softly. "It's the least I can do." "You don't have to," Lucas began. But she was already at the wash basin, her movements quick and practiced. "I want to," she insisted, pumping water over the dishes. "Your home's been my sanctuary. Besides," she glanced around the cabin with a small smile, "it could use a woman's touch." Lucas felt heat rise in his cheeks. He knew the cabin was spare, just the essentials he'd accumulated over years of solitary living. "Ain't used to company," he mumbled, running a hand through his hair. "Never saw much need for fancy things." Isabella wiped her hands on her apron and began straightening the few items on his shelves. "Not talking about fancy. Just proper order." She picked up a stack of tin plates, dusty from disuse. "These need a good washing, and your quilt could use mending. I noticed some tears." "You don't need to trouble yourself," Lucas protested, watching as she efficiently organized his meager belongings. "You're my guest, not my housekeeper." She paused, turning to face him. "Mr. Boone, I need to keep busy. If I sit still..." Her voice wavered slightly. "Please, let me be useful." Something in her tone made Lucas's objections die in his throat. He nodded slowly. "Reckon I could use some help," he conceded. "But you rest when you need to." Isabella's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. She set about her self-appointed tasks with quiet determination, and soon the cabin took on a different character. The windows gleamed, the floor was swept, and a pot of coffee bubbled fragrantly on the stove. Lucas watched her work for a while, then grabbed his water buckets. "Creek needs checking anyway," he said gruffly, needing some air. "Won't be long." The morning was cool and clear as Lucas made his way down the familiar trail. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance a fox barked. The creek burbled steadily, its waters still high from the recent storm. As he filled his buckets, voices drifted down from the ridge above. Lucas stilled, recognizing Deputy Hollis's distinctive drawl. "Prime parcels, gentlemen. Railroad's offering top dollar, and I can guarantee smooth transfer of deed." Lucas crouched lower, straining to hear. Two other men were with Hollis. He recognized Joseph Miller's voice, one of the larger ranchers in the area. "Seems mighty convenient," Miller was saying, "how these properties keep coming available." Widow Jensen's place, the McAllister homestead. "Times are hard," Hollis replied smoothly. "Folks get behind on their taxes, can't keep up. Better the land goes to progress than lie fallow. And you're sure there won't be any complications?" Hollis's laugh held no warmth. "I handle all the paperwork myself. Clean and proper, far as anyone can prove. Though between us..." His voice dropped lower, forcing Lucas to strain to hear. "Best get your offers in quick. Once the railroad announces their plans official, prices will soar." The voices moved away, but Lucas remained frozen, pieces falling into place. The mysterious property sales that had driven several families from their homes, the way Hollis always seemed to profit from others' misfortune. And Isabella. Lucas grabbed his buckets and hurried back to the cabin, his mind racing. Inside, he found Isabella humming softly as she mended his quilt, her needle flashing in the sunlight. "You overheard something," he said without preamble. "That's why he wants you back so bad." Isabella's hands stilled. She carefully set aside her mending, the color draining from her face. "Yes," she whispered. "I found his ledger. The real one, not the official records. He's been falsifying documents, forcing sales." She twisted her hands in her lap. "When he caught me looking, he..." She didn't need to finish. The fading bruise on her cheek spoke volumes. Lucas paced the small cabin, agitated. "Just heard him up by the creek, talking deals with Miller. Railroad's buying up land that ain't rightly for sale." "He'll destroy anyone who stands in his way," Isabella said softly. "That's why I had to run. Not just the beating, but..." She drew a shaky breath. "I couldn't live with myself, watching him hurt more people." The afternoon stretched long as they sat with this shared knowledge. Lucas built up the fire, while Isabella prepared a simple supper of beans and salt pork. As darkness gathered outside, she broke the silence. "I married him too quick," she confessed, staring into her cup. "After my Thomas died, I was lost. Clay seemed strong, dependable. He offered security, respectability." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Fool that I was, I believed him." Lucas looked up from his plate, struck by the raw pain in her voice. "Ain't foolish to want security," he said quietly. "Ain't foolish to hope." "What about you?" Isabella asked gently. "All alone out here, there must be a story." Lucas shifted uncomfortably, studying his hands. "No story. Just..." He swallowed hard, the words sticking in his throat. "Never been much good with people, especially women. Never." He gestured helplessly. "Never been with one. Don't know how." He waited for judgment, for laughter, but when he dared look up, Isabella's eyes held only kindness. "There's no shame in that," she said softly. "Sometimes waiting is wisdom." The evening settled around them like a blanket. Lucas banked the fire while Isabella prepared for bed, each moving in their own orbit but somehow less awkward than before. When all was quiet, Lucas knelt by his bedroll in the main room, hands clasped. "Lord," he whispered, "give me wisdom. Show me how to protect her." In the bedroom, Isabella knelt by the window, moonlight silvering her hair. "Father," she prayed silently, "keep us safe. And thank you for sending me to this good man's door." The night deepened, full of cricket song and distant coyote calls. Two souls, brought together by circumstance, found a measure of peace in shared prayer and unspoken understanding. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they rested in the knowledge that they were no longer alone in their struggles. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lucas's yard as his axe bit deep into another log. Sweat trickled down his back despite the cool air, but he welcomed the familiar labor. The steady rhythm of chopping helped quiet his troubled thoughts. Thunk, split, stack. Again. Through the cabin window, he caught glimpses of Isabella bent over his work shirt, her needle flashing as she mended a torn sleeve. She'd gathered his spare clothes earlier, tutting at the state of them, and insisted on repairs. The sight of her working so naturally in his home stirred something deep in his chest. Thunk, split, stack. The woodpile grew as the morning stretched on. Lucas lost himself in the routine, letting his muscles work while his mind churned over their predicament. He'd just hefted another log onto the chopping block when a sharp crack split the air. Gunfire. Lucas dropped flat, scanning the tree line. More shots rang out, bullets whining through branches. He spotted movement along the ridge, riders weaving through the timber, too far to make out faces, but he knew who they were. "Isabella," he called, keeping his voice low as he crouched, ran to the cabin. She met him at the door, face pale but composed. "We need to go." "Now." She nodded, already gathering her shawl and the small bundle of belongings she'd fled with. Lucas grabbed his rifle, powder, shot, and hunting knife. He hesitated, then snatched up his mother's old Bible from the shelf. Another volley of shots peppered the trees behind the cabin. Warning shots meant to frighten rather than hit, for now. Lucas took Isabella's elbow, guiding her toward the dense stand of pines behind his home. "There's a game trail," he murmured. "Stay close. Step exactly where I step." Isabella's hand found his arm, gripping tight as they slipped into the shadows beneath the trees. Lucas led them along a path that seemed random, but followed the subtle signs of deer passages. Bent twigs, worn bark, compressed earth. He'd learned these secret ways over years of hunting, and now they offered escape. "Careful here," he whispered, helping Isabella over a fallen log. "Watch your feet. Make no sound." She proved a quick study, mimicking his cautious movements. When he paused to listen, she froze instantly. When he pointed out hazards, loose rocks, thorny branches, she nodded in understanding. They moved like shadows through the afternoon, working deeper into the wilderness. The sun was low when Lucas finally called a halt beside a clear creek. Isabella sank gratefully onto a moss-covered stone while he surveyed their surroundings. The spot was well hidden, sheltered by old growth pines and backing against a rocky slope. "We'll camp here," he decided. "Got water, good cover. I'll set some snares before dark." Isabella watched with frank admiration as Lucas worked, his big hands surprisingly deft as he fashioned traps from twine and supple branches. He moved through the forest with quiet confidence, reading signs invisible to her eyes. "There's rabbit sign all through here," he explained, gesturing to droppings and nibbled vegetation. "Should have meat for supper, God willing." His prediction proved true. As dusk gathered, Lucas returned to their camp with 2 plump rabbits. He showed Isabella how to clean them, his instructions gentle and patient. Soon the meat was spitted over a small fire, fat dripping and sizzling on the coals. My father would have appreciated your skills, Isabella said softly, watching the flames. He loved working with animals, had the gentlest touch with sick lambs and colicky horses. She smiled at the memory. Our farm was small, but it was heaven to me. The smell of fresh hay, watching new calves take their first steps, gathering eggs while the hens clucked and fussed. Lucas listened intently, turning the spit-roasted rabbits to cook evenly. He said little, but his eyes never left her face as she spoke of her childhood home. When she described helping birth a breech foal during a thunderstorm, he found himself leaning forward, caught up in her tale. The mare was wild with fear, Isabella continued, but Pa just kept talking to her, soft and steady, until she calmed. When that foal finally stood up and nursed. She shook her head, smiling. I've never seen Pa so proud. You miss it, Lucas said quietly. It wasn't a question. Every day. Isabella accepted the portion of rabbit he offered her. But memories are precious things. They remind us who we are, where we come from. They ate in comfortable silence as night settled around them. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows against the tree trunks. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, and crickets began their evening chorus. Isabella's voice lifted softly in song, blending with the night sounds. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. The familiar hymn floated through the trees like a benediction. Lucas closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him. His mother had sung this same song years ago, when he was small enough to sit in her lap. The memory ached, but sweetly. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. When the last note faded, Lucas opened his eyes to find Isabella watching him, her expression gentle in the firelight. He ducked his head, fumbling for words that wouldn't come. Thank you, he managed finally. Been a long time since I heard singing. Isabella smiled. Music makes any place feel more like home, she said simply. Home. The word echoed in Lucas's mind as he settled onto his bedroll, rifle close at hand. The night air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, familiar as breathing. But now there was something new. The soft sound of Isabella's breathing nearby, the lingering notes of her hymn. His little cabin had always been a refuge, a place to hide from a world that made him uncomfortable. But lying here under the stars, listening to the creek's quiet murmur and Isabella's peaceful sighs, Lucas realized something had shifted. For the first time, he could imagine his home as more than just a shelter, could see it filled with warmth and music and shared meals. The thought should have frightened him. Instead, it settled in his chest like an ember, warm and bright with possibility. Dawn painted the sky in gentle brush strokes of pink and gold as Lucas and Isabella broke camp. The morning air held a crisp bite, making Isabella pull her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Lucas noticed her shiver and wordlessly added his spare jacket to her shoulders. The rough wool swallowed her frame, but warmth bloomed in her chest at his thoughtfulness. We'll head higher today, Lucas said, pointing toward distant peaks. Safer up there and plenty to eat if you know where to look. They walked single file along game trails, Lucas leading the way. Every so often he'd pause to point out something of interest, a cluster of mushrooms sprouting from a fallen log, wild berries ripening in patches of sunlight, herbs growing between rocks. These here are cattails, he explained, kneeling beside a small pond. Roots are good eating. Leaves make decent cordage, too. His big hands moved with surprising delicacy as he demonstrated how to harvest them. Isabella watched intently, trying to memorize every detail. When Lucas showed her how to identify watercress growing along the stream banks, she eagerly joined in gathering the peppery greens. Like finding treasures, she said, carefully wrapping the plants in her apron. Though I reckon I've got a lot to learn about forest food. Lucas's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. You're doing fine. Here, Let me show you something else." He led her to where the stream widened into a clear pool. Pulling a length of line and several hooks from his pack, Lucas demonstrated how to set up a trout line. Isabella leaned close, watching his hands work. "Now you try," he said, offering her the tackle. Isabella's first attempts were clumsy. The line tangled, and the hooks caught on everything except fish. She fumbled another knot and laughed at herself, shaking her head. "Lord have mercy, I'm all thumbs. These poor fish are in no danger from me." To her delight, Lucas actually chuckled, a rusty sound, as if long unused, but genuine. The sound seemed to surprise him as much as hers. Their eyes met, sharing the moment of unexpected joy, before Lucas ducked his head shyly. "Takes practice is all," he said softly, moving to help her untangle the line. "Here, like this." Under his patient guidance, Isabella eventually managed to set a proper trout line. Her whoop of triumph when she succeeded echoed off the rocks, startling a pair of quail into flight. Lucas smiled again, more easily this time. They continued their journey as the sun climbed higher, pausing occasionally for Lucas to point out more wilderness wisdom, which berries to avoid, how to read weather from cloud patterns, ways to move quietly through brush. Isabella soaked up every lesson eagerly. By midday, they reached a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers. A small herd of deer grazed at the far end, their tails flicking lazily in the sunshine. Lucas touched Isabella's arm, signaling her to move slowly and quietly. He led her to a fallen log positioned perfectly to watch the peaceful scene. Before Isabella could sit, Lucas pulled off his coat and spread it over the rough bark to make her a more comfortable seat. The thoughtful gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, settling onto the makeshift cushion. Lucas nodded awkwardly and sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. They shared a simple meal of dried meat and wild greens while watching the deer. Lucas explained in low tones how to recognize different animals by their tracks and habits. When a young fawn wobbled over to nurse from its mother, Isabella smiled at how Lucas's voice softened, describing the creature's first days of life. "You have such a gentle way with animals," she observed. "Most men I've known, they only understand force, breaking horses, driving cattle. But you see them different." Lucas's cheeks reddened at her words. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve, struggling to respond to the praise. "Animals ain't complicated," he finally managed. "They just want honest treatment. No cruelty in them unless humans put it there." Isabella nodded slowly. "Like people, maybe. Cruelty's learned, not born." She thought of Hollis's rage, his fists, his casual brutality. Some men think strength only means breaking things, but real strength is in knowing how to be gentle. Lucas stared at his hands. Big, calloused hands that could split logs and field dress game, but also tie delicate fishing knots and tend to injured creatures. Isabella watched emotions play across his face as he processed her words. The deer gradually drifted away, and Lucas reluctantly suggested they move on. They traveled until evening approached, finally making camp in a sheltered hollow surrounded by towering rocks. The natural formation created a cozy space, with walls that would reflect their fire's warmth. "I'll check the trout line before dark," Isabella offered, surprising Lucas. He nodded, looking pleased at her initiative. She returned triumphant a short while later, carrying 2 gleaming fish. "Look what I caught." "All by myself, too." Lucas had the fire ready and showed her how to clean and cook the trout using hot stones. The fish sizzled tantalizingly as Isabella arranged them on broad leaves she'd gathered. When everything was ready, she looked to Lucas expectantly. He bowed his head, hands clasped loosely in his lap. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for safety in our journey, and for—" He paused, glancing briefly at Isabella before continuing softly. "For good company. Amen?" "Amen. Isabella echoed, deeply touched by the simple prayer and his inclusion of her in it. They ate in comfortable silence as darkness gathered around their fire-lit hollow. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rock walls as they finished their meal. Isabella found herself studying Lucas's profile, noting how the firelight softened his features. He seemed more at ease here in the wilderness than he had been in his cabin, as if the open sky and forest silence allowed him to breathe more freely. She realized she felt the same way. Despite the danger that had driven them here, despite the uncertainty ahead, something was opening up between them like a flower turning toward the sun. Trust, yes, but also understanding. Joy in shared discoveries. The simple pleasure of having someone to talk to laugh with, to pray beside. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks spinning up toward the stars. Lucas added another piece of wood, careful not to let the flames grow too high and visible. Isabella wrapped herself in his coat, breathing in the mingled scents of wood smoke and pine, feeling safer than she had in months. She caught Lucas watching her and offered a gentle smile. He didn't look away this time, but smiled back, small and uncertain, but real. The expression transformed his whole face, and Isabella's heart gave a peculiar flutter. The night deepened around them, filled with cricket song and the distant call of an owl. Neither felt compelled to break the peaceful silence with words. Some things, Isabella reflected, were better understood in quiet moments like these, in shared meals and simple prayers, in teaching and learning, in laughter surprised out of hiding. In the firelight's glow, fear seemed very far away. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now they had this: a safe harbor, a warm fire, and the deepening trust between them. Days flowed like the mountain streams in their hidden meadow. Morning mist gave way to golden afternoons, and Isabella found herself settling into an unexpected peace despite their circumstances. She and Lucas fell into simple routines that felt as natural as breathing. Lucas had fashioned a lean-to shelter against a rock face, using pine boughs and canvas from his pack. The space was small but dry, and Isabella had made it homey with wildflowers in a tin cup and fresh pine needles for bedding. They kept the fire small and well hidden, cooking only when clouds provided cover for the smoke. On their fourth morning in the meadow, Isabella noticed her boots were wearing thin from their flight through rough country. She tried to hide her limp, but Lucas's keen eyes missed nothing. That afternoon, he pulled leather scraps and strong thread from his pack. "Let me fix those for you," he said quietly, gesturing to her feet. Isabella hesitated. "I don't want to waste your supplies." "Ain't waste if it's needed." He held out his hand for her boot, and she relented. While Lucas worked, Isabella tended their small camp. She'd learned to bank the fire properly, to wash their few dishes with sand from the creek bottom, to hang their food high in trees away from bears. Small skills, but they made her feel useful. The afternoon sun warmed the meadow as Lucas carefully stitched new soles onto her boots. Isabella gathered wood, staying within sight of camp as they'd agreed. When she returned, she found him working on something new, a piece of wood he was slowly shaping with his knife. "What are you making?" she asked, settling nearby with their clothes that needed mending. "Spoon," he mumbled, focused on his carving. "Noticed you struggling with the tin one." Isabella smiled, touched by his observation. The tin spoon from his cabin was bent and awkward to use, but she hadn't complained. She watched his big hands move with surprising delicacy over the wood, bringing shape from the formless block. The peaceful sounds of their work, his knife scraping wood, her needle pulling thread, filled the air. Birds called in the distance, wind rustled through aspens. Isabella felt content in a way she hadn't since before her first husband died. Never courted nobody. Lucas's words came so suddenly that Isabella wasn't sure she'd heard right. She looked up to find him staring intently at the half-formed spoon, his face flushed red. "I mean," He swallowed hard. Never even kissed a woman. Probably think that's strange, man my age. Isabella set aside her mending, choosing her words carefully. There's no shame in that, Lucas. There is, though. His knife moved jerkily now, nearly slipping. Town folks always laughed, said I was simple, backward. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Maybe they was right. No. Isabella moved closer, her heart aching at the pain in his voice. They were wrong. Lucas tried to backtrack, clearly embarrassed by his confession. Shouldn't have said nothing. Don't know why I dash. Lucas! Isabella reached out slowly and placed her hand over his, stilling the nervous movement of the knife. His skin was warm and rough with calluses. She felt him freeze at her touch. Listen to me, she said softly. In my life, I've known men who could charm any woman they wanted. Men who boasted of their conquests. Men who thought taking what they wanted made them strong. She squeezed his hand gently. But kindness, true kindness like yours, that's rarer than any kind of strength. Lucas stared at their joined hands, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. His breathing had gone shallow, and Isabella could feel a fine tremor running through him. You're not simple, she continued. You're good. There's a difference. You've built a life of honest work. You've learned to live in harmony with these mountains. And when a stranger came to your door in need, you helped without question. She smiled sadly. That's more than my husband ever did, for all his worldly experience. Lucas finally raised his eyes to meet hers. The vulnerability she saw there made her heart twist. You really mean that? Every word. They sat in silence for a long moment, hands still touching, while Lucas absorbed her words. Finally, he nodded once and carefully withdrew his hand. But something had shifted between them, like ice breaking up on a spring river. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Lucas finished the spoon, carefully smoothing it with a piece of sandstone before presenting it to Isabella. She ran her fingers over the polished wood, admiring the subtle curves he'd carved to fit her hand. It's beautiful, she said. Thank you. He ducked his head at the praise, but smiled slightly. As evening approached, they shared a simple supper of rabbit stew, using Isabella's new spoon. The wood felt warm and alive compared to the old tin utensil. Afterward, they sat side by side near the banked fire, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Isabella found herself humming without really meaning to, an old hymn her mother used to sing. The melody floated up toward the stars, soft and sweet in the gathering dark. To her surprise, Lucas's deep voice joined in hesitantly on the second verse. He was slightly off-key, his timing uncertain, but the earnestness in his rough singing brought tears to her eyes, their voices twined together in the ancient words of praise and supplication. When the hymn ended, neither moved to break the spell. They sat with shoulders nearly touching, watching sparks drift up to join the stars. The night air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. Isabella felt the rightness of the moment settle into her bones. Here, in this hidden meadow with this gentle man, she had found something she thought lost forever. Peace. Safety, the beginnings of joy. Despite their uncertain circumstances, she and Lucas had created a kind of family, small but precious. But even as that thought warmed her, she noticed Lucas's posture change. He sat straighter, head cocked like a deer catching a concerning scent. "What is it?" she whispered. He rose silently and moved to the edge of their camp. In the fading light, Isabella could just make out what had caught his attention, fresh tracks in the soft earth near their spring. Horse tracks, and more than one set. The shadows suddenly seemed darker, more threatening. Their peaceful evening shattered like glass as reality intruded. They were still being hunted. The riders were getting closer. Lucas returned to the fire, his face grim but composed. He didn't need to speak. Isabella could read the warning in his eyes. Their time in this sanctuary was coming to an end. Soon they would need to move again, deeper into the wilderness. But for now, for this one last quiet evening, they sat together by the dying fire. Isabella found herself humming again, softer this time, as if to hold back the encroaching darkness with nothing but melody and faith. Lucas's shoulder pressed warm against hers, solid and reassuring. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to two souls, finding unexpected grace in each other's company, even as danger drew ever nearer to their hidden meadow. Dawn painted the mountains in shades of pearl and gold as Lucas crept from their camp. His moccasins made no sound on the damp earth as he circled wider and wider, reading the signs of the night. 20 years of trapping had taught him the language of broken twigs, disturbed leaves, and pressed grass. What he found made his stomach clench. Horse tracks, fresh from the night. Not just one set, but many, creating patterns that told a clear story. Hollis's men had split into groups, methodically searching the highlands. Like wolves circling prey, they were drawing closer. Lucas hurried back to camp, where Isabella stood warming her hands by the morning fire. She read the worry in his face before he spoke. "They're getting close," he said softly. "Found tracks from 3, maybe 4 groups of riders. They're searching smart this time, working the high ground." Isabella's hands trembled as she poured coffee into their tin cups. "Where can we go?" Lucas accepted the cup, letting its warmth steady him. "There's places up higher. Old hunting grounds, I know, spots where horses can't easily follow." He hesitated, "But the climb won't be easy." "I can manage," Isabella said firmly, though fear flickered in her eyes. They packed quickly, leaving no trace of their camp. Lucas added Isabella's bedroll to his own pack without comment, knowing the day ahead would tax her strength. The sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks when they set out, following a steep game trail that wound up through stands of spruce and fir. The morning hours passed in steady climbing. Isabella stumbled often on the rough ground, unused to the thin air and treacherous footing. Each time she faltered, Lucas's hand appeared at her elbow, strong and steady. He never rushed her, never showed impatience. When she needed rest, he found smooth rocks for her to sit on, offering water from his canteen. By midday, Isabella's legs shook with every step. Sweat darkened her hair despite the cool mountain air. Still, she pressed on, determination written in every line of her body. Lucas watched her with growing admiration. This woman who had lived all her life in town was facing the wilderness with more courage than many mountain men he'd known. The trail grew steeper, switching back and forth across the face of the mountain. The trees thinned, giving way to meadows bright with wildflowers. Above them, snow still capped the highest peaks, though summer was well advanced in the valleys below. Late afternoon found them climbing the last steep pitch to a hidden meadow Lucas remembered from his hunting days. Isabella's foot slipped on loose shale, and she would have fallen if Lucas hadn't caught her arm. She sagged against him, breathing hard. "Not much further," he murmured. "There's a good spring up ahead. We can rest there." Isabella nodded, too winded to speak. Lucas kept his hand under her elbow as they made the final climb. When they crested the ridge, even his breath caught at the view. The meadow spread before them like a hidden paradise. A clear spring bubbled from rocks at one end, creating a small stream that wandered through grass dotted with wildflowers. Tall pines ringed the open space, offering shelter from wind and prying eyes. The late sun turned everything golden. "Oh," Isabella breathed. "It's beautiful." Lucas helped her to a smooth boulder near the spring, where she sank down gratefully. He filled their canteens, then began setting up camp while Isabella rested. By the time he had a fire started and their bedrolls laid out, color had returned to her cheeks. To his surprise, Isabella rose and began wandering through the meadow, gathering flowers. He watched from the corner of his eye as she wove them together with practiced fingers. When she tucked the bright blooms into her hair, something caught in his chest. The setting sun turned her hair to copper and gold, the flowers making a crown that no queen could match. Her face had softened, years of worry falling away as she twirled slowly, enjoying the simple pleasure of flowers and fading sunlight. Lucas found he couldn't look away. Isabella caught him staring and blushed prettily. Foolish of me, I suppose. Playing with flowers like a girl when we should be serious. No, Lucas said quickly. It's nice. Been a long time since anybody brought beauty up to these mountains. Her smile warmed him more than the fire. She came to help him prepare their simple supper, moving with new energy despite the day's hard journey. As they ate, she broke the comfortable silence. Thank you, Lucas. He looked up, confused. For what? For giving me back my laughter. She stirred the beans in her tin plate. After my first husband died, I thought I'd never laugh again. Then I married Clay, thinking he'd help me find joy. Her voice grew distant. Instead, he took what little happiness I had left. But here, with you? She gestured at the meadow, the flowers in her hair. I feel like myself again. Like I can breathe. Lucas's heart pounded so hard he was sure she must hear it. Words rose in his throat. How her presence had awakened something in him too. How her smile made his lonely cabin feel like a home for the first time. How he wanted to protect her forever. But fear closed his throat. He was just a rough mountain man. What could he offer someone like her? He swallowed the words back, managing only a gruff, "You're welcome." But something had shifted between them. As darkness fell, they sat close beside the fire, shoulders touching. Neither spoke, but the air hummed with unspoken feelings. Isabella's hand lay near his on the log they shared. Lucas found himself acutely aware of that small space between their fingers, wanting to bridge it but not daring to move. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant in the clear mountain air. Around them the peaks rose like ancient guardians, offering shelter in their shadow. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks dancing upward to join the stars. Yet even in this peaceful moment, Lucas couldn't forget the danger. Somewhere in the darkness below, men with guns were searching. His eyes constantly scanned the tree line, ears alert for any sound that didn't belong to the night. Isabella seemed to sense his tension. She hummed softly, not a hymn this time, but a gentle lullaby. The melody floated on the evening air, weaving with the fire's warmth and the whisper of wind in the pines. Lucas felt some of his worry ease, replaced by a different kind of tension, one born of proximity to this remarkable woman and the feelings he could no longer deny. Their hands remained almost touching on the log between them, that small space electric with possibility as the mountain night deepened around their hidden meadow. Dawn broke over the hidden meadow with unusual serenity. No distant gunshots echoed through the valleys. No hoofbeats disturbed the morning quiet. Lucas woke early as always, but for once his shoulders weren't tight with worry. He built up the fire and set coffee to brew, watching as golden light spilled across the grass where Isabella still slept peacefully. A movement at the edge of the meadow caught his eye. A wild mountain goat, probably drawn by their salt, picked its way between the rocks. Behind her trotted a half-grown kid. Lucas stayed very still, years of hunting having taught him the value of patience. Isabella stirred, then sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Lucas held a finger to his lips and gestured toward their visitors. Her eyes widened with delight. "Can we catch them?" she whispered. Lucas considered. The nanny goat looked to be in milk, and fresh milk would be a welcome change from their basic trail food. He nodded slowly. If we're careful. I'll try to get behind them, drive them toward that narrow spot between the rocks. If you stand there with my coat spread wide, might be able to corner them long enough to get some milk. Isabella's face lit up at the prospect of a challenge. She took his heavy coat and crept toward the rock formation, while Lucas made a wide circle through the trees. The goats, focused on grazing, didn't notice their approach until Lucas suddenly appeared, waving his arms and whistling sharply. The startled animals bolted, straight toward Isabella. She spread the coat wide, trying to look big. The nanny skidded to a stop, Kid bleating behind her. Before the goat could turn, Lucas was there, his strong hands gentle but firm as he caught her. "The milk pail," he called. "Quick!" Isabella scrambled for their cooking pot, bringing it just as the goat started struggling. Lucas somehow managed to hold the animal steady while showing Isabella where to position the pail. "You ever milked before?" he asked. "Only cows, and that was years ago on my father's farm." "Similar enough. Just be gentle. She's scared." Isabella's first attempts went wide, making Lucas duck to avoid the spray. She giggled, then caught herself, afraid the sound would startle the goat. But the nanny had settled somewhat, and Lucas's quiet murmur seemed to calm her. "There you go," he encouraged, as Isabella finally found the right motion. "That's the way." Milk pinged against the pot's bottom. The kid danced nervously nearby, making Isabella laugh again. This time, the sound just floated on the morning air, pure and joyful. Lucas found himself chuckling too, the unfamiliar sensation warming his chest. When they had enough milk, Lucas released the goat. She bounded away, Kid following, but didn't go far. Instead, she settled on a nearby rocky outcrop, watching them with wary interest. "I reckon she might stay around a while," Lucas said, watching Isabella strain the milk through a clean cloth. "Long as we don't spook her." "I'd like that." Isabella poured them each a cup of the still warm milk. "Oh, it's so sweet." Lucas sipped his portion, savoring the rich taste. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had fresh milk. Watching Isabella's obvious enjoyment made it taste even better. They spent the rest of the morning gathering berries from bushes Lucas knew grew in the high meadows. Isabella's quick fingers soon filled their makeshift baskets, though plenty of berries found their way directly to her mouth, staining her lips purple. Lucas pretended not to notice how that made his heart skip. After the berry picking, Lucas showed Isabella how to set up drying racks for the venison they had left. She proved a quick study, asking intelligent questions about smoke and airflow. Her practical nature impressed him. She didn't shy away from the work just because it was unfamiliar. The day passed in comfortable activity. They talked easily while they worked, sharing stories of their lives. Isabella spoke of her childhood on her father's farm, of happy years with her first husband before fever took him. Lucas found himself opening up about his own past, his mother's gentle faith, his father's quiet strength, the loneliness after they were gone. As evening approached, Isabella insisted on preparing supper herself. Lucas sat nearby, whittling a new spoon from fresh wood, stealing glances at her confident movements around the fire. She'd adapted to camp life with remarkable grace, he thought. Where many town women would have complained, she found ways to make even this rough existence feel like home. The meal was simple, but satisfying. Dried venison stewed with wild onions, the last of their beans, and fresh berries for dessert. They ate in comfortable silence as the sun set in spectacular colors behind the peaks. After they'd cleaned up, Lucas found himself unable to sit still. Something had been building in him all day, all week, if he was honest. The ease between them, the way Isabella's presence had transformed his solitary world, the growing ache in his heart whenever she smiled. It all pressed against him, demanding to be spoken. "Isabella?" His voice came out rough. She looked up from where she sat by the fire, her face soft in the flickering light. I need to tell you something." She waited patiently while he struggled with the words. Finally, they burst from him in a rush. "I ain't never." He swallowed hard. "What I mean is, I've never been with a woman. In any way. Never even kissed one proper." His face burned, but he forced himself to continue. "I know that probably sounds strange for a man my age. Pathetic, maybe." "Lucas?" Her voice was gentle as summer rain. She rose and came to sit beside him, close enough that he could smell the lingering scent of berries on her breath. "Look at me." He lifted his eyes to hers, expecting to find pity or amusement. Instead, he saw only warmth and understanding. "Then let your first knowing be kindness," she whispered, laying her hand over his where it rested on his knee. Lucas trembled at her touch. Her fingers were work-roughened like his own, but so much smaller, so much gentler. She leaned closer, and he found himself meeting her halfway, drawn by something stronger than his fear. Their first kiss was soft as falling snow. Lucas felt tears spring to his eyes at the tenderness of it, at the acceptance in Isabella's touch. When they parted, she brushed the moisture from his cheeks with careful fingers. "You've been so good to me," she murmured. "So gentle and strong at once. Don't ever think yourself less because you waited for the right time, the right person." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as more tears came. She pressed her face against his chest, her own tears dampening his shirt. But these were healing tears, washing away years of loneliness and doubt. They held each other for a long time under the emerging stars. No words were needed. Their hearts spoke in the language of shared breaths, of fingers woven together, of foreheads touching in the gathering dark. When they finally settled by the fire again, Isabella tucked securely against his side. Lucas felt as though his whole world had shifted. The wilderness around them, once his refuge from human contact, now felt like the setting for something precious. Something like home. The night deepened around their small camp. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanged by the miracle happening below. The fire burned low, casting just enough light to see Isabella's peaceful face as she dozed against his shoulder. Lucas stayed awake a while longer, marveling at how completely this woman had transformed his life. For the first time, his solitary existence felt not like a sanctuary, but like an emptiness she had filled. Whatever dangers tomorrow might bring, tonight they had found something true and healing in each other's arms. Dawn painted the mountains in soft gold as Lucas stretched and rose from his bedroll. Isabella still slept peacefully nearby, her face serene in the early light. He paused to watch her for a moment, marveling at how natural it felt to see her there, as though she'd always been part of his morning routine. Their firewood supply had dwindled over the past days. Lucas grabbed his axe, checking that Isabella's rest remained undisturbed. He'd let her sleep. She deserved the extra rest after yesterday's long berry picking. Besides, he needed time alone to sort through the overwhelming feelings their evening together had stirred up. "Won't be gone long," he whispered, though she couldn't hear. The morning air felt crisp against his face as he hiked to a stand of dead pine he'd spotted yesterday. The familiar rhythm of chopping wood usually cleared his mind, but today his thoughts kept drifting back to camp. To Isabella. To that kiss. His axe bit deeper into the wood as warmth spread through his chest at the memory. The sun climbed higher as he worked. By midday, Lucas had a decent pile of split logs. He gathered what he could carry and started back toward camp, already imagining Isabella's welcoming smile. But something felt wrong before he even cleared the trees. The birds were too quiet. The air held an unnatural stillness that made the hair rise on his neck. He dropped the firewood and drew his hunting knife, moving forward in the silent, careful way that had kept him alive in the wilderness for so many years. As he approached their camp, his worst fears took shape in terrible detail. The fire pit was scattered, cooking pot overturned. Their few possessions lay strewn about as though thrown aside in a struggle. Branches were broken on the bushes near their sleeping place, and the earth showed the clear marks of multiple horses and boots. "No," he breathed, the word barely a whisper. "Please, no." His eyes caught on a splash of faded blue fabric snagged on a thorny branch. Isabella's shawl, the one she'd worn every evening when the mountain air grew cool. Lucas grabbed it with trembling hands, his throat tight with fear and guilt. The tracks told the story clearly enough. At least 4 riders had surprised the camp. Signs of Isabella's resistance showed in the churned earth near where she'd slept. They'd dragged her to the horses. He could see where her heels had dug in, fighting them every step. Lucas's chest heaved as panic clawed at him. He should have been here, should have protected her, should never have left her alone, but self-blame wouldn't help Isabella now. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think past the fear. The tracks led downhill, toward town. They had maybe 2 hours head start. Lucas grabbed his rifle and what supplies he could quickly gather. He couldn't match their speed on horseback, but he knew these mountains better than any of Hollis's men. There were ways down that only a lifetime in the wilderness could teach. He moved as fast as he dared, following game trails and old creek beds, taking shortcuts where the riders would have to go around. His legs burned and his lungs ached, but he pushed on. The sun crossed the sky as he descended, marking the slow hours of his pursuit. By late afternoon, he caught his first glimpse of the riders through the trees. 4 men, just as the tracks had shown. Isabella sat slumped before one of them, her hands bound. Even from this distance, Lucas could see how she held herself straight and proud despite her captivity. His fingers tightened on his rifle. He could take out 2, maybe 3 before they knew what hit them, but the 4th would have time to kill Isabella before Lucas could stop him. The risk was too great. "Forgive me," he whispered, watching them ride away with his heart. "I'll find another way." He followed them carefully as they approached the town, staying hidden in the deepening shadows. The riders made straight for the jail, where Deputy Hollis waited on the porch like a spider in its web. "Well, well," Hollis's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "Look what we have here." "My dear wife," returned at last. Isabella said nothing as they pulled her from the horse, but her silence spoke volumes of defiance. "Lock her up," Hollis commanded. "We'll let her cool her heels tonight while I decide how best to handle this situation." He raised his voice, addressing the small crowd that had gathered. "Let this be a lesson, folks. A wife's place is with her husband. Running off with some mountain man ain't proper behavior for a decent woman." Lucas's hands clenched into fists as he watched from the alley behind the general store. The townspeople's faces showed mixed emotions, concern, disapproval, but also fear of Hollis. No one spoke up as Isabella was marched into the jail. Through the barred window, Lucas caught a glimpse of her face in the lamplight. Though tired and dusty from the ride, her expression remained unbowed. She'd survived worse than this, he realized. She was stronger than anyone knew, but strength alone wouldn't get her out of that cell. Lucas pressed himself against the rough boards of the building as Hollis's men walked past his hiding place. His mind raced, trying to find a solution that wouldn't get them both killed. Night fell over the town like a heavy blanket. Most windows darkened as citizens retreated to their homes, though light still burned in the saloon and the jail. Lucas moved carefully through the shadows to the edge of town, where he found a sheltered spot among some rocks. For the first time since he was a boy, he felt the desperate need to pray. He knelt in the darkness, clasping Isabella's shawl between his calloused hands. "Lord," he whispered, voice rough with emotion, "I ain't talked to you proper in a long time. Ain't been much of a believer since Ma died. But Isabella, she's got faith enough for both of us. She sees good in me I forgot was there." The stars wheeled overhead as he struggled with the words. "I'm scared, Lord." Scared of failing her. Scared of dying. Scared of living without her if things go wrong. His shoulders shook. But I got to try. She deserves better than what that man's going to do to her. Please, please give me the strength to help her. The wisdom to find a way. Fear still churned in his gut, but something else grew alongside it. Determination. Whatever it took, whatever price he had to pay, he would not abandon Isabella to Hollis's cruelty. She had awakened something in him that had slept too long. Not just love, but faith in the possibility of justice, of redemption, of a life filled with meaning beyond mere survival. He touched the shawl to his lips once before, tucking it carefully inside his shirt, close to his heart. Then he settled in to watch the jail, his mind working through plans and possibilities as the night deepened around him. The path ahead looked dark and dangerous, but he was no longer walking it alone. He had Isabella's strength to guide him, and maybe, just maybe, God's help as well. Morning sunlight crept over the town's weathered buildings, bringing with it the usual bustle of horses, wagons, and townsfolk starting their day. Lucas huddled in the shadows of the livery stable, his back pressed against rough wooden boards. The smell of hay and horse sweat helped mask his presence as he watched the street through a gap between planks. Deputy Clay Hollis strutted down the boardwalk, stopping to chat with every passerby. His voice carried clearly in the crisp morning air. "Such a shame about Isabella," he said to Mrs. Peterson outside the general store, shaking his head with false concern. "The isolation up in those mountains must have addled her mind something fierce." Lucas's hands balled into fists as he listened. "Poor thing's been having spells," Hollis continued, laying it on thick. "Talking nonsense about railroad deals and such. Doctor says women ain't built for living rough like that. Makes them go peculiar in the head." Mrs. Peterson clucked her tongue sympathetically, but Lucas noticed how she wouldn't quite meet the deputy's eyes. She hurried into the store, leaving Hollis to spread more poison down the street. From his hiding place, Lucas could see the jail's barred window. Isabella sat inside, her figure a pale shape in the dimness. Though tired and disheveled, she kept her spine straight and her head high. The sight of her dignity in the face of Hollis's lies made Lucas's chest ache. He waited until mid-morning, when the deputy was occupied at the saloon. Moving carefully, Lucas bought a hot meal from the hotel kitchen, beef stew with fresh bread. The cook's eyebrows rose at his rough appearance, but she asked no questions when he paid with clean silver. Making his way behind the buildings, Lucas approached the jail's rear window. He cleared his throat softly to alert Isabella to his presence. "Lucas," her whisper was barely audible. "Brought you something to eat." He passed the covered bowl through the bars, his fingers brushing hers. Isabella's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. "You shouldn't risk yourself like this. Couldn't leave you hungry." Lucas glanced around nervously. "How are they treating you?" "Well enough. Hollis wants to keep up appearances." She spooned some stew into her mouth, eating quickly but neatly. "He's spreading tales about my mental state, trying to discredit anything I might say about his dealings." Lucas growled low in his throat. "Ain't right what he's doing." "The Lord sees the truth," Isabella said firmly. "He has not forsaken us, Lucas. I feel his presence even in this cell." Her quiet faith stirred something deep in Lucas's soul. He reached through the bars to touch her cheek gently. "I'll find a way to help you." "I promise." "I know you will." She pressed his hand briefly before pulling away. "Now go before someone sees you." Lucas retreated to his hiding place, mind working furiously. Violence wouldn't solve this. Hollis had too many men, too much official authority. But truth might have power here. He spent the afternoon preparing carefully. In the livery's quiet corner, he sharpened his axe to a razor edge, more for comfort than need. He cleaned and oiled his rifle, checking each mechanism. But these were not the weapons he planned to use. As evening approached, Lucas made his way to the small church on the edge of town. The whitewashed building looked tired in the fading light, its steeple reaching toward darkening skies like a pleading hand. Reverend Matthews was cleaning the church windows when Lucas approached. The preacher started at Lucas's sudden appearance, nearly dropping his rag. "Evening, Reverend," Lucas said softly, trying to look as unthreatening as possible despite his size and wild appearance. "Mind if we talk a spell?" The preacher hesitated, clearly uncertain about this strange mountain man, but something in Lucas's earnest expression made him nod. "Come inside, mister." "Boone." Lucas Boone. Inside the church, light filtered through colored glass, painting rainbow patterns on rough wooden pews. Lucas removed his hat, running fingers through his tangled hair. "What brings you here, Mr. Boone?" Reverend Matthews asked, settling onto a front pew. Lucas took a deep breath. "Need to tell you something important, Reverend. About Deputy Hollis and the railroad." The preacher's face tightened. "That's a dangerous topic, Mr. Boone." "Truth often is." Lucas leaned forward, voice low and intense. "I heard him myself talking to railroad men. He's been selling town land that ain't his to sell, taking bribes to push people off their property. Those are serious accusations." Matthews studied Lucas carefully. "What proof do you have?" "Isabella, Mrs. Hollis. She overheard more than I did. That's why she ran. That's why he's trying to discredit her now, calling her mad." The preacher was silent for a long moment, fingers worrying at his Bible's worn cover. "I've noticed things. Little things. Good families suddenly losing their homes, strange men coming and going, but without proof." "Sometimes knowing in your heart is proof enough," Lucas said quietly. "You're a man of God, Reverend. You must feel when something ain't right." Matthews looked up at the cross hanging behind his pulpit. "I do feel it. Have for months now, but speaking against the deputy." "Ain't asking you to speak against him," Lucas said. "Just to listen, to look closer, to help others see what's happening before it's too late." The sincerity in Lucas's rough voice seemed to reach something in the preacher's conscience. He straightened his shoulders. "Mrs. Hollis, I've known her since she was a girl. Never known her to lie or act unstable. She's the strongest, most clear-headed woman I ever met," Lucas said softly. Matthews nodded slowly. "I'll pray on this, Mr. Boone. And I'll start asking questions. Carefully. That's all I ask, Reverend." "Thank you." Lucas slipped out of the church as darkness fell. He made his way back to his observation post, hope flickering in his chest like a candle flame. Through the night, he watched the jail and thought about Isabella's unwavering faith. He wasn't much for praying himself, but he found comfort in knowing she was holding on to her belief in justice and redemption. As the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky, Lucas noticed movement in the town. People gathering in small groups, talking in low voices. The Reverend moved among them, speaking quietly but intently. A change was coming. Lucas could feel it in the air, like the electric tension before a storm. The truth was spreading, seeping through the cracks in Hollis's careful facade of respectability. Through the jail window, he saw Isabella kneeling in her cell, hands clasped in prayer. Her lips moved silently, but Lucas knew she was thanking God for this small beginning of justice. He touched the rough bark of a nearby tree, grounding himself in its solid reality. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time since Isabella's capture, he felt real hope. Not everything could be solved with fists or firearms. Sometimes the strongest weapon was simply speaking truth to power, and letting that truth work in people's hearts. Lucas settled in to watch and wait, as the town slowly woke to the new day, and to new questions about their deputy's true nature. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street as Deputy Clay Hollis emerged from the jail, dragging Isabella by her arm. Her wrists were bound with rough rope, but she walked with quiet dignity despite her disheveled appearance. Hollis had gathered the town to witness what he called justice, though his smirk revealed the cruel theater of it all. Townsfolk lined both sides of the street, their faces a mix of confusion and discomfort. Mothers pulled children close, and men shifted uneasily, hats in hand. The scene felt wrong, a respected widow being paraded like a common criminal. "Let this be a lesson," Hollis called out, his voice carrying down the street. "This is what happens to wives who forget their place and spread lies about honest men." Isabella said nothing, but her chin remained high. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not in pleading, but in quiet challenge to their consciences. Lucas stood in the shadows between the general store and the blacksmith's shop, his heart pounding. The weight of his rifle felt heavy on his shoulder, but he knew he wouldn't use it. Violence would only prove Hollis right about him being a wild mountain man. Instead, he touched the small wooden cross in his pocket, one Isabella had carved during their days in the high meadow. As Hollis reached the center of town, preparing to mount up and take Isabella to the territorial prison, Lucas stepped out into the sunlight. His tall frame cast a long shadow across the packed dirt of the street. "That's far enough, Deputy," Lucas said, his voice carrying clear and steady despite his usual shyness. A ripple of whispers passed through the crowd. Everyone knew of Lucas Boone, the reclusive trapper who rarely came to town, but few had ever heard him speak. Hollis's face darkened. "This ain't your business, mountain man. Step aside. It became my business when you forced an innocent woman to flee for her life." Lucas took another step forward, planted his feet firmly. "Isabella ain't no runaway wife. She's a witness to your dealings with the railroad men." The deputy's hand drifted toward his gun. "You're speaking dangerous words, Boone. Truth is often dangerous to men like you." Lucas looked past Hollis to address the gathered townspeople. "Your deputy's been selling land that ain't his to sell, taking bribes to force good folks off their property? Isabella heard him planning it all." More murmurs rose from the crowd. Farmer Jenkins spoke up from the back. "Like what happened to the Miller family's place?" "And old widow Carson's farm," someone else added. Hollis's face reddened. "These are lies." This mountain hermit's filled her head with nonsense. She's clearly unstable. "No." The voice came from behind the crowd as Reverend Matthews stepped forward, Bible in hand. "I've known Isabella since she was a child. She's one of the most stable, God-fearing women in this town." The preacher moved to stand beside Lucas, his presence lending weight to the accusation. "I've seen the strange men coming and going, watched good families displaced, kept quiet too long, God forgive me." Hollis's smile turned ugly. "Seems you've been busy, Boone, spreading your poison." His revolver cleared its holster with practiced speed. "Step back now, all of you. This woman's going to prison where she belongs." Lucas didn't move. He kept his rifle slung across his back, hands open at his sides. "I won't fight you, Deputy. Won't meet violence with violence, but I won't let you take her either." "Then you'll die where you stand." Hollis cocked the hammer. Isabella struggled against her bonds. "Clay, don't! You can't kill an unarmed man in front of witnesses." "Watch me." The deputy's finger tightened on the trigger. The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Then Farmer Jenkins stepped forward. "My boy saw you meeting with them railroad men behind your office, Deputy. Heard you naming prices for land that wasn't yours." Another voice joined in. "You threatened my family when we wouldn't sell." "You said the territorial governor authorized it all," called Mrs. Miller. "But my cousin works for the governor. Says he never heard of any such order." The crowd pressed closer, their fear turning to anger as years of suspicion found voice. Hollis swung his gun from person to person, but there were too many. His deputies, seeing the tide turn, stepped back from his side. "You're all fools!" Hollis shouted. "The railroad's coming whether you like it or not." "I was just being smart about it." Lucas took another step forward. "Put down the gun, Clay. It's finished." "Nothing's finished." Hollis squared his aim at Lucas's chest. "I'll kill you first, then her—" Before he could fire, Farmer Jenkins and 3 other men rushed him from behind. The gun went off, the bullet kicking up dust at Lucas's feet. In moments, the deputy was disarmed and pinned to the ground, his face pressed into the dirt he'd stolen from so many. Isabella broke free in the commotion and ran to Lucas. He caught her in his arms as she wept, not from fear, but from relief. His big hands gently worked at the ropes binding her wrists. "You came for me," she whispered against his chest. "Couldn't leave you." Lucas's voice was rough with emotion. "God gave me strength I didn't know I had." The townspeople gathered around them, some offering apologies for not seeing the truth sooner, others thanking Lucas for his courage. Reverend Matthews approached with a gentle smile. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," the preacher said. "He sent a quiet mountain man to teach us all about speaking truth to power." Isabella looked up at Lucas, her eyes shining. Not so quiet anymore. Lucas felt his cheeks redden, but he didn't look away from her gaze. Around them, the town buzzed with activity as men organized to send for the territorial marshal. Others helped Hollis's former deputies gather evidence from his office. Letters, contracts, proof of his dealings with the railroad. The morning's bright sun seemed to shine warmer now, as if heaven itself approved of justice being done. Lucas held Isabella close, marveling at how God had led him from his solitary life to this moment, standing brave and tall in the light of day, surrounded by community instead of hiding in the shadows. Isabella's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. Together they watched as Hollis was led away to the same jail cell where he had imprisoned her. The deputy's power was broken, not by violence, but by the simple courage of people standing together for truth. The midday sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as townspeople gathered in small clusters, their voices a mix of shame and regret. Deputy Hollis's arrest had stripped away their collective blindness, leaving raw truth exposed in the harsh light. "Miss Isabella, I'm so sorry," Mrs. Peterson whispered, wringing her hands. "We should have seen." More voices joined in, offering apologies, but Isabella swayed slightly on her feet, overwhelmed by the attention. Lucas noticed immediately, his protective instincts rising. Without a word, he stepped closer, using his broad frame to shield her from the pressing crowd. "Folks mean well," he murmured softly, for her ears alone, "but you need rest." Isabella nodded, grateful for his understanding. Lucas guided her carefully through the throng, his hand gentle at her elbow. Some tried to follow, but his quiet presence discouraged pursuit. They made their way to the white-painted parsonage, where Reverend Matthews waited on the porch. Come in," the preacher said, holding the door. His wife, Sarah, appeared with a bundle of clean clothes. "You can freshen up here, away from prying eyes." Lucas released Isabella's arm reluctantly. "I'll wait outside," he said, his voice gruff with concern. "Thank you." Isabella touched his hand briefly before following Sarah inside. Lucas settled on the porch steps, his shoulders tense. He could hear muted voices through the window, Sarah helping Isabella wash, offering comfort without demands. His fingers worked nervously at the brim of his hat, turning it round and round. The afternoon light softened as time passed. Lucas remained vigilant, nodding politely but briefly to those who passed by. Inside, he heard quiet movement, the splash of water, gentle conversation. His thoughts drifted to the past weeks, how Isabella's presence had awakened something long dormant in his soul, not just companionship, but faith itself. The door creaked open behind him. Lucas stood quickly, turning to find Isabella transformed. Gone were the prison dirt and tears. She wore a borrowed dress, her hair neat and face clean, but it was her smile, weak yet real, that caught his breath. "You look," he stumbled over the words, "better." "I feel better." Isabella stepped closer. "Lucas, you saved my life today." He shook his head, surprising himself with his ready response. "No, ma'am. You saved mine first." At her questioning look, he continued, the words coming easier than ever before. "Been dead inside a long time. You taught me to laugh again, to pray again, brought God's light back to my dark places." Reverend Matthews appeared in the doorway, his weathered face kind. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes he sends angels to the wilderness to teach mountain men how to live again." He raised his hands in blessing over them both. "May you find peace together, wherever your path leads." As evening approached, several townspeople invited them to supper. Those who had stood with Lucas against Hollis. They gathered at the Jenkins farm, sharing simple fare and quiet conversation. Farmer Jenkins's wife served fresh bread and stew, while others brought pies and preserves. "You'll always have friends here," Mrs. Miller assured Isabella, squeezing her hand. "We've learned our lesson about staying silent in the face of wrong." Lucas watched Isabella accept their kindness with grace, but he noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept straying to the window where mountains loomed dark against the sunset sky. His heart beat faster, wondering if she yearned for the town's comfort or something else. Night fell soft and purple over the land. Lucas walked Isabella back to the parsonage where Reverend Matthews had offered her shelter. They paused at the gate, reluctant to part. Crickets chirped in the grass, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine from the high country. "Lucas," Isabella's voice was steady in the gathering dark. "I need to tell you something." He waited, barely breathing. "The town means well. They're good people, most of them." She turned to face him fully. "But I don't want to live here anymore." "Your cabin, up in the mountains, that's where I found peace, where we found each other." Her hand found his in the darkness. "If you'll have me, that's where I want to make my home. Beside you." Lucas's heart soared even as his voice trembled. "You'd choose that lonely place? Over all this?" "It's not lonely when you're there." Isabella stepped closer. "You filled it with kindness, with quiet strength. That's worth more than all the town's comforts." Lucas squeezed her hand gently, joy making him bold. "Then we'll make it a real home together. With God's help." Isabella's smile in the starlight was all the answer he needed. Morning light spilled over the eastern ridge as Lucas and Isabella set out from town. Their mule, loaded with sacks of flour, sugar, coffee, and other kindnesses from repentant townspeople, plodded steadily along the trail. Lucas led his horse while Isabella rode, though she insisted she could walk. "Reckon we got enough supplies here to last till winter," Lucas said, patting the mule's flank. The animal's saddlebags bulged with preserved fruits, dried meat, and even a few precious books the preacher's wife had pressed into Isabella's hands. "The townsfolk were more than generous," Isabella replied, adjusting her shawl against the morning chill. "Though I suspect some were trying to ease their conscience." Lucas nodded, understanding her meaning. The silence between them felt comfortable now, nothing like the tense quiet of their first days together. Birds called from the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine needles warming in the sun. As they climbed higher, Isabella pointed out places they had hidden during their flight. "Remember that hollow where you taught me to set snares?" she asked, smiling at the memory. "Never had such a quick student," Lucas answered, his voice warm with pride. By midday, they reached the creek where they had made their first camp. The water burbled over rocks just as before, but everything else felt different. Lucas helped Isabella down from the horse, his hands steady and sure on her waist. They settled on a fallen log to share a simple lunch of bread and cheese. Isabella watched the playing water, her expression thoughtful. "You know, when I first ran from town, I truly believed I'd never laugh again." She turned to Lucas, her eyes bright. "Yet here I am, smiling more than I have in years." Lucas ducked his head, but his words came clear and honest. "Never thought anyone would want to stay with me. Figured I was too rough, too backward." He glanced at her sideways. "Too shy." "Those are the very things I love about you," Isabella said softly. They resumed their journey, the afternoon sun warming their backs. The familiar trail wound through aspen groves and across mountain meadows. Lucas found himself pointing out things he'd never shared with another soul. The best berry patches, the hidden springs, the places where elk came to drink. The sun was setting when they finally crested the last rise. Below them, Lucas's cabin sat waiting, its weather-worn logs glowing golden in the evening light. They led the animals into the barn first, caring for them properly before approaching the cabin door. Together they stepped inside. Lucas struck a match and lit the lamp, while Isabella moved naturally to the hearth, starting a fire as though she'd done it 100 times before. Soon, warm light filled the single room. Isabella began unpacking their supplies, humming an old hymn as she worked. Her sure movements and gentle voice transformed the cabin's familiar space into something new, a home. Lucas settled at his workbench, taking up tools to repair a wobbly chair, but his eyes kept straying to Isabella as she moved about, arranging their shared life with quiet joy. The fire crackled peacefully, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, night creatures began their evening songs, but inside, warmth and contentment filled every corner. This simple cabin, once Lucas's refuge from loneliness, had become something far greater, a place of new beginnings. Winter settled deep over the mountain, wrapping Lucas's cabin in thick blankets of snow. The dark mornings found him outside before dawn, breaking ice in the animals' water troughs and splitting logs until sweat froze on his brow. Inside, Isabella kept the hearth blazing, her capable hands turning simple ingredients into filling stews that simmered all day. The cabin had changed since autumn. Dried herbs now hung from the rafters, their subtle fragrance mixing with wood smoke. Patches of bright fabric, remnants from Isabella's mending work, added spots of color to the rustic walls. Even Lucas's old quilt had been carefully repaired, its worn squares reinforced with patient stitches. Their days fell into comfortable patterns. While Lucas tended the animals and checked his trap lines, Isabella transformed their humble space. She scrubbed floors, patched clothes, and somehow made their stores stretch further than Lucas had ever managed alone. When he returned from the cold, stamping snow from his boots, warm aromas of beans, cornbread, and coffee always greeted him. But it was the evenings that brought the deepest change. After supper, they would sit at the table with Lucas's mother's old Bible between them. The lamp cast a gentle glow as Isabella guided Lucas's finger across the pages, helping him sound out the harder words. His voice, though hesitant, grew stronger with practice. "The Lord is my shepherd," Lucas read slowly one night, the familiar psalm coming alive in new ways. "I shall not want." Isabella nodded encouragement, her shoulder touching his as she leaned close. "You're reading so much better now," she said softly. Outside, winter wind howled through the pines, rattling the cabin's shutters. The storm had been building all day, piling snow against the walls and turning the world beyond their windows into a white blur. But inside, warmth and peace reigned. Lucas set the Bible aside carefully, its leather cover worn smooth by years of hands. Across the table, the lamplight caught golden in Isabella's hair, reminding him of summer wheat. She had brought such grace to his rough existence, teaching him that strength could live in gentle things. His hand found hers across the table, work-roughened fingers twining together. "I'm not alone anymore," he whispered, the words carrying all the weight of 40 solitary years. Isabella's eyes shined with tears in the lamp's glow. "And I'm no longer afraid," she replied, her voice steady and sure. The woman who had fled to his door in desperate terror now stood tall in her own right, fear replaced by dignity. They rose together, meeting in an embrace that spoke of home and healing. The fireplace crackled, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Though the mountain winter raged fierce beyond their door, within these walls, faith had taken root like a sheltered seedling, growing stronger each day. Lucas held Isabella close, marveling at how natural it felt now to share his space, his life, his heart. The mountain man who had spent 4 decades avoiding human touch now found his greatest joy in simple moments like this, standing in his cabin's warm circle of light, holding the woman who had chosen him, building a future neither had dared to dream of. The lamp burned late into the night, its steady flame a beacon of hope. Like the oil that sustained its light, their love was simple but enduring, built on shared faith, mutual respect, and the quiet courage to begin again. In finding each other, they had found not just safety or comfort, but the profound gift of family and the promise of days filled with purpose and peace. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.